So welcome and thank you all for coming today. It's really exciting that United Against Hate Week and Banned Books Week have coincided this year. And I think it's a great opportunity to really highlight the way books that share different identities, different ways of living, really broaden people's mind as well as make people feel seen and honestly can save lives. So I just wanted to give a little background on this year's Banned Books Week. This year so far, 414 attempts to censor 1,128 unique titles, which is down a little bit this time from last year, which is good. But still, the number of documented attempts to censor books is unprecedentedly high since 2020. Before 2020, we never seen anything like the organized effort. And there was recently, on September 17th, a banned books, or not a banned books, it was an Intellectual Freedom Summit where Nicole Hannah-Jones, the author of the 1619 Project, spoke. And she said it really well in her keynote. She discussed the power of reading to change minds, build empathy, and topple systems. But the current legislative movement to erase the history of racial inequality and injustice is one tactic of re-implementing inequitable policies. It's a narrative, more than anything, that drives policy, not facts, research, or peer-reviewed data. Who controls the narrative is what determines what policies we accept as a country. While the strategy of banning books is not new, it is our collective duty to fight back, and it should not take courage to be a librarian. So, just some food for thought, and I am very happy to introduce the panel. Our very own children's librarian from Capitola, Baumbach. We have Zaki from the Diversity Center. Trask, our high school student. And Maddeline, Aliyah, our fantastic author. And you're going to find out a little bit more about each of them as they talk.
All right, I guess I'm kicking things off. My name is Amber, as you heard. I grew up in California, but for the last 10 years I did live in Florida. While in Florida, I worked as a public librarian. I worked in an elementary school as what they call media specialists or school librarian, same thing. And then I worked for the Department of Education in Florida as the director of library media and instructional materials. So as you can imagine, that was challenging times. So the other panelists are going to be able to tell you much more about how book banning has affected them on a personal level, I'm assuming, or perhaps how a certain book has saved them. And I'm here to talk briefly about what book banning looked like in Florida and looks like, continues today, of course. A cautionary tale, perhaps. This is, California is not Florida, very obviously, but there is a different side of the country, and these things are happening in other places. And it's because of laws that have been passed in Florida, because of the administration that is currently in power there, and because of the partnerships that administration has with these outside entities such as Moms for Liberty. The rise of book banning in that state, well, across the country obviously, but also in Florida, has just been astronomical. So Florida is a district-led state, which means that any book banning or book challenges that you hear about are the result of individual school districts. So a book may be banned in Clay County, but not in Leon County. So each district, they have to follow the state policies and laws, but each district kind of does things their own way, which is, I think it's a little bit different than how California runs its schools. The state will say, and I said thousands of times to people that called and emailed, the state does not have a banned books list. And while that is technically true, there are, each district does have a list of books that have been challenged or removed because of bans in the state. And it's because of the laws and the rules that led to those decisions that came from state policy. The districts are not banning books just because they feel like it. They are removing books from classrooms and school libraries because of all of these new state laws that have come into effect. To get to the meat of it, PEN America has recorded around 10,000 book bans in the past couple of years countrywide. And I don't know, like you'd said 1,000 for this past year, I don't know if those are, documented or how they do their reporting, but that's the number that they came up with. And about half of that number comes directly from Florida. Texas is very high on that list as well, but I think Florida is still number one. 37% of those 10,000 bans contained characters of color or themes of race or racism. And 36% of those bans had LGBTQ plus characters or themes, which is huge. Book bans, of course, disproportionately affect people or book characters of color or those that are LGBTQ plus. So we got here because Florida enabled book bans by passing laws that allow it to happen. Many of these laws were written or directly influenced by special interest groups such as Moms for Liberty, like I mentioned earlier. And there's more groups than that, of course, but they're kind of the big one that everyone knows about. For example, some laws, book banners used the language in a 2022 state statute that states that, and this is directly from the statute language, any material made available in a school or classroom library may not contain content that depicts or describes sexual conduct. Book banners used this to challenge authors such as Hemingway, Tolstoy, Toni Morrison, etc. Like the classics, as well as everything modern under the sun has some sexual description or something in it, right, that they've used to remove it. This same statute was used to challenge and remove any books that had anything to do with LGBTQ plus characters or themes. This same statute also threatened school librarians with a felony if they were accused of having any of these pornographic materials within their libraries. And in the 22-23 school year, revisions to state statutes made the contents of classroom libraries the responsibility of librarians. So the school librarian was not only responsible for, the books that were in the media center or the library, but now all of the individual teachers' classroom libraries were now the responsibility of school librarians as well. And what that meant is that one school librarian does not have time to go into each teacher's classroom and look through hundreds, sometimes thousands of books to make sure that there's no depictions of sexual conduct or any of the other various things that they wrote laws about in the past few years. So that meant that teachers packed up their classroom libraries and put them in storage, or in the case of my own children in Florida in public schools, they put butcher paper over the bookshelf so that students couldn't access those free reading materials, which was just insane. It was insane. Publishers, the other part of my job was working with instructional materials, which is any textbooks that are in classrooms have to be officially adopted by the state before they can go into classrooms. Publishers that were attempting to get their materials into classrooms were told by the state, and I am the one that told them this, unfortunately, that they had to remove any references to LGBTQ plus topics, including factual information such as the Stonewall riots in 1969. We called publishers and told them to remove that information, or their book would not be published. In 2023, a bill was signed that requires that sex ed classes teach students that sex is binary and male or female, and that these sex roles are, and this is from the statute, binary, stable, and unchangeable. And that sex is defined exclusively by internal and external genitalia present at birth. That language is in Florida state statutes. And then the last thing I just wanted to end with is that I don't want you to think that the whole state is just full of like crazy book ban hating people, because that's not the case. It really is just a handful of people that have really ruined it for everybody, right? And it's these extremist people. For example, there's one man that lives in Clay County, and he's responsible for over 3,000 challenges. Just gross. Books that he has not read, and he does not have a child in a school district in Florida. So that's it from me. To wrap it up, I am very glad to have moved back to California. And I'm very glad to have brought my children back.
Hi everyone, my name is Zach. My pronouns are they, them. I want to talk to you about what it feels like to not have access to this knowledge, to not have access to community and culture. To start, just to let you a little bit about who I am that's in front of you today. I work at the Santa Cruz Diversity Center. I've been working there for a little bit over a year now. I help with our research, but one of the things that I have the most joy and honor is I get to work with a lot of our trans and non-binary youth. And I've been facilitating a group for about a year now with them. Outside of that, I am a PhD student in developmental psychology at UCSC, going into my 4th year, so we're doing it. I also am a partner. I've been engaged to my partner for 6 years. I am a dog mom with a dog with a bright pink tail. And I'm a local drag artist that's been doing drag professionally for almost 4 years now. And I share all these things because I'm not only incredibly proud, but it's such a privilege to be able to engage in this level of deep knowledge sharing and co-constructing information, as well as like finding outlets to be able to express myself, to be able to create community, to be able to be my own advocate, as well as an advocate for others. And I want to share with you what my journey was like to getting here and the role that knowledge and books specifically played in that, or even the lack thereof. So I think a lot of people grew up in California. I grew up in rural Appalachia, Virginia. I think when I say that, it usually doesn't give enough context. So the hometown that I spent the most of my life developing under was a population of about 270 people. I know. So I'm sure it's no surprise that we not only knew everybody's drama, but that level of shallowness in the community, if I may say, prevented a lot of knowledge sharing from alternative ideas, being able to kind of think creatively and externally. We were very focused on like, we're farmers, we're gonna learn how to farm, and that's gonna be how our education is gonna be structured around it. So growing up, I was like very masculine, which I know is very shocking to say now. But that masculinity played a really big role into like how I thought I was supposed to exist in this world. I was like, and did every sport you could imagine. If I was reading a book or watching a show, it was usually some sports, which is so crazy for me to think back on now, because you could not pay me money to watch football. But that was part of the culture. It was part of the world that I lived in. And there was no access to alternative information. We didn't have internet growing up in rural Appalachia, Virginia. We didn't really have a library. My school's library consisted of about like 3 bookshelves, all of which was like agriculture development and like a little bit about like white history specifically. And so I didn't realize that like this developing underneath this, that I was doing a disservice not only to myself, but I wasn't getting an idea of who I was. So when I started realizing that I was attracted to same-sex or different individuals, I felt this level of pressure of like, oh, I know this is wrong. What am I supposed to do now? And I didn't have resources to turn to. There was no representation for me to find. And so I was quiet about it. I busied myself and burned myself out because I didn't know how else to be able to access this world. And so as I was growing up, we finally got access to dial-up internet. It was very fun. And then my first access to knowledge was incredibly harmful. It was on tips on how to be able to cure yourself with being gay. It was chat forums, and those chat forums berated and said some pretty horrific things about queer people. And this was my first access to knowledge and information. And so this is what I just like wanting you to imagine when there is not a healthy way to represent information, like that's what exists out for young queer people. So I think it's a really important context to set for that. So needless to say, it harmed me in a lot of different ways. I had to grow and learn from this. My ability to develop relationships with my peers suffered a lot because of it. I went into high school, and I think as a lot of young people do, I made myself so busy because I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to think about me being what I perceived at the time as being abnormal. And then there came a point in my life in high school where I got enough information. I started watching, there was a gay soap opera that was German that I would watch at like 2 a.m. And that like depicted like a healthy relationship for the first time for queer people. And so I came to a point that it was either I come out and at least try to like be comfortable in my own body, or I just like stop being in it entirely. And so I made the choice. I came out. When I came out in high school, I was immediately reacting not only from my school, but I was reacted from the community around me. I was 14, I had a work permit because I was a low-income kid of a farmer, and I got fired from my job immediately. The local paper around my area, Baumbach Times, published an article, because I was a swim team captain, published an article saying that they were worried about what our youth had to offer. And all during this time, I could feel myself wanting so desperately to have an outlet, to be able to find information for something that was able to give me information so I can make sense of this like swirliness that was happening around me. And that didn't exist. I started finding little Tumblr like subcultures that was like a little bit helpful, but a lot of it was this lack of information. There was constantly new identities coming out. There was a lot of reaction and retaliation. And then me coming out, I recognized how deeply and harmful my community felt about me. This does get positive, I promise. And so that lack of knowledge, the lack of representation, the lack of being able to gain access to who I am and to know that there's another part of my community had a huge deficit in me. And so when I went to undergrad, I finally started taking classes. I took my first human sexuality class and was taught the difference between sexuality and gender, which I think a lot of us now, it feels like something that's pretty negotiable, right? Like we can like recognize that sexuality and gender are two different things for the most part. I wasn't until maybe I was like, I guess like 18, 19, like finally starting to separate those concepts. I started reading a lot because I finally had access to books and education. A lot of my books were looking at history of queerness, and it was probably one of the first times that I started learning about drag and drag artistry. And it was this, I remember so distinctly reading about Divine, who I don't know, she's a very powerful drag queen, we love Divine. And she was so radical in the way that she pushed queer culture and wasn't afraid to be kind of raunchy about it, but also wasn't afraid to be loud and powerful and so boisterous in who she was. And I just remember reading about her and just finally feeling like, oh, this has existed this whole time. That there is a history of artistry, of queer culture, and of community. And it turned me from feeling about like my sexuality and my gender identity was something I needed to be ashamed of and like figure out how to hide or cope with to my best inability, to shifting something that I could be proud of, that I could be expressive of, that I could share with others and be able to like hold my chest out and flip my wig and not be worried about it. And that started allowing me to finally be able to explore my gender identity. And so Divine was a really magical experience. I made it through undergrad. I still kept burning myself out. I graduated with 3 degrees, which was too many. There was no reason for that. But I graduated and I realized that so much of my life, I had this limitation placed on me, these expectations of who I was supposed to be, and I was never given this opportunity for representation. And I wanted to make sure that that was never experienced by another young person. I wanted to make sure that this is not a cycle that's repeating, especially when like the banned books, we were talking about several groups that use parental advocacy rights. A lot of the books that we're talking about is a way in which like maintains dominant power systems, right? It is a way to maintain cisgender, heteronormative, white male perspectives. And when we try to challenge that and deconstruct that, we've seen the same reiteration of this violent cycle over and over and over again. But I think it's always like forgotten, or maybe it's lost upon those that are challenging it, what that harm actually is. Like, we're not saying that is like transitioning or turning a person into something else, but it is what is giving us access to feeling comfortable in our own skin, to be able to take a breath and feel like you're not gonna fall apart because you did so. And I think I witnessed that and experienced it, and it became really vital to me that I get to use my voice to help advocate for that, to be able to demonstrate that knowledge and getting access to it. I think you're about to hear some really beautiful stories of these books and what they have to offer. And I think it's a really critical reminder that when you don't have this, when these banned books are not contested, or we create an environment in which knowledge is allowed to be restricted or withheld from people, the act of harm is not only on an individual, but it like continues to perpetuate the systemic violence in our world, and it's something that we like can be corrected, right? Like the 3,000 books that have been done for someone who doesn't have a kid in school and who's never read the books, like why is their voice being able to have like such power and highlight? And I think that's a question that I try to really challenge a lot, and like not only the work that I do, but also by like highlighting and thinking of the young queer people who are active in these representations. And that's my tea.
Hi, my name is Alex Trask. I'm a 16-year-old student at Scotts Valley High, graduating this year. I use he, they pronouns and am a trans and queer individual. I think growing up in this generation, thank God, I have the resources that I do. I think I grew up just up the road, very local to Santa Cruz my whole life. I grew up a very, very like feminine little girl. Loved dresses, loved pink, still love dresses and pink. But my mom actually raised me in my room was green. I wore non-gendered clothes. I played with trucks. I didn't want any of that. My mom described it as when I went to her first birthday party, I found a baby doll for the first time, in love. I carried her around until I lost her somewhere. Her name was Baby Anna. She was super cute. She was missing a finger. But I was the girliest girl. Until I wasn't. I came out as non-binary to my mom in 2022, I think. She wasn't the most accepting, I'll start with that. But also, she was born in the 70s. I think she was raised in a different perspective than that. Queer people weren't really a thing. And if we were a thing, we were supposed to fit in our little box. Like, you're gay. Alright, cool. You have to be, like, super girly, but you also have to keep quiet and, like, just, like, live in your little box. Right? If you're non-binary, you have to be extremely androgynous. Right? Box. Again. Right? I think, so that was definitely tricky for her. And then, surprise, surprise, I realized I wasn't only non-binary, but I was trans, identified as non-binary and trans. And I think that realization just in yourself is one of the most difficult things. One of the most difficult things I've ever done in my 16 years of life. I think the internal homophobia and transphobia is one of the worst things to start with. Like telling yourself like, oh, like I don't know this, like this, I must be crazy. And I think once you come to terms with that, it gets a lot better. Choosing your own name is pretty cool. That was my favorite part. And then coming out, again, definitely tricky, and not all the way out, but I'm getting there, and so is my mom. I know she loves me, and we just have to get there. But I think that's a little bit more about me. But I think, like, growing up, I think I read, this is Genderqueer. It is a graphic novel by Maya Kobery. E uses pronouns, neo-pronouns. Super much of a slay. Excuse me if I mess up on these pronouns. I have not used these before, so this is my first time. All is new. This book I read 2022, I think, for the first time. Mom actually recommended recommended to me. I went to my high school library and I read it within a day. Whole book. I grew up on graphic novels. Love them. This book changed my life. It was an interesting sensation. It was like, wait, hold on. Like, this kind of feels like me. Like, I've done some of these things. Like, I relate to this. And this book is just like, it also is a story of the author growing up in a rural town. But also growing up just like any other person. Like, he grew up as not gendered, which I think is pretty cool, not similar to me. But as the story goes on, the character, I guess not the character, Maya discovers how, like, the gendered things of the world, and as he does this, he discovers that, like, he isn't normal, and normal, big quotes. And it's just interesting how it talks about, like, venturing into her identity, which is cool. I just love this book so much. I've read it, probably more than 10 times. Don't actually own the book. This is the live book copy. I had to hunt it down, so it was the only available copy in this entire county. So, which I think is cool. But this book was the most challenged book of 2021 and the most banned book, I think, 2022 and 2023. Yeah, so it is pretty popular amongst banned books. But I am so glad to be able to have just walked into my library and just picked this up. Like, I just went in there and grabbed it. It was just as simple as that. If you haven't read this book, please read it. It is amazing. You don't have to think that hard. It's just pictures and little words. It's really good. It's a good perspective. If you're a trans person, if you have loved ones that are trans people, or just non-binary, gender non-conforming, queer, read it. That's all I have to say about that. This book. This is the author. I'm just going to talk a little bit about it. I love this book. I read it. I got to read some of it before it was published. So.
What's the name of the book?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Not everyone can read. Yeah. It's your book.
It's called This Is My Body, Poems by a Teen Trans Femme.
Yes, we love this book. I think when I went to the opening or the launch, when I got home, I read it through. There were tears. This is a really is it more of a collection of poems? A collection of poems. Is it a book?
It's a chat book.
Chat book, okay. When I read this, yeah, it is so deep and powerful. You guys should all go buy it on Amazon. Ooh. She was prepared. I think my favorite poem is probably, where is it? A Trans Maiden Manifesto. I like this one. I don't know how you're going to portray your book, but as another trans teen, reading this book by another trans teen was a really powerful experience for me. It was like, cool, I know this person, but they also read this book. Yeah, so this is also, it's not banned, is it?
Not yet. We're waiting.
Yeah, but that was my little spiel about these poems. So, yeah, I think fan books, read them because you can, and why not?
Hello, my name is Maddeline Aliyah, and the Witch Boy trilogy came to me at a very volatile time. I had an incredibly rocky experience coming to terms with being trans, and as my expression began to change, I still felt isolated and scarred by the time I had spent as a child, surrounded by people who thought I was insane for thinking I was a girl and thinking I was insane as well. When I asked for this trilogy for Christmas, I was angry at everyone in my life. The people who didn't support me for not knowing better, and the people who could have supported me for not knowing that little girl was even there. When I asked for this trilogy for Christmas at a friend's recommendation, I expected a queer story. I did not expect that story to be mine. This story takes place in a world of allegory, where boys become shapeshifters and girls become witches. And just as the name suggests, these books follow a boy with the soul of a witch. The odds against this boy speak to the odds against all of us before we find our tribe. He can't be a man, but no one will let him be a woman. For the first time in my life, searching through every community that was supposed to understand, I had found something that speaks to what it's really like. It had been impossible for me to celebrate what I had gained because I was still grieving the childhood I had lost. And this story was a hand on my shoulder. The first voice I found that said it was okay to be upset. But this story comes with a word of caution. I had assumed the people who didn't understand the witch boy would be the villains of this story. It would be an easy thing to write. If I had written it, I imagined that is what I would have done. But this story goes deeper. The bigots think they know what's best for our witch boy, and some of them come to understand, and some of them don't. But in the end, they don't matter. The antagonist of this story is an adult who is just like the protagonist, but who never found a way out. Once upon a time, they were a boy who was born with the soul of a witch, but when no one accepted them for the path they tried to walk, they chose hatred. They chose to force themselves to be a man and lose themselves in the rage and pain. I do not want to spoil what happens in this trilogy. I would highly recommend you read it for yourself. But the antagonist is depicted with the highest compassion for their grief, though their anger becomes directed at the wrong people. You can't help being angry, this book says. It's okay, but hatred is a choice. I've never found another series like it. I wish I had this book when I was a little boy, unsure of my path and identity. I ache for that child, desperate for a voice to tell them that it's okay to explore who you are, and it's okay not to know, because this book would have changed my world. There are so many people out there whose worlds would still be changed by a book like this. When I sat down to write my book, This Is My Body, Poems by a Teen Trans Femme, I had a similar message in mind. I wanted my book to change people the way the witch boy changed me. To give people that shiver of being alone one second and being understood the next. I split my book into 3/3. 1, the body counterfeit, about the grief of letting an identity go. 2, the body politic, about the politics of being queer. And 3, the body manifest, about the joy of discovering who you really are. It's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be angry. But we exist in a community, so we don't have to stay that way. And before I finish, I'd like to read a poem I wrote to mark the changes I've been through, becoming the woman I am today. It's called Trans Maiden Manifesto. You saw a weak boy. I was a smart girl. You saw a timid boy. I was a gentle girl. You saw a pathetic boy. I was a marvelous girl. You see a madman. I am a sad woman. You see a broken man. I am a token woman. You might see an old lad. You might see a disgusting man. I will be a distinguished woman. You might see an old lad. I will be a bold lady. You might see a bitter lad. I will be a savage lady. You might see a burdensome lad. I will be a breathtaking lady. Look at you. Heart race, hands sweat, cheek flush, blood rush. Look at her. Head tilt, hair messy, grin impish, posture proud. She'll be there. Through the window, on the puddle, by the phone screen, in the mirror, and she loves you. You love her. You are her. And damn, is she fine.
Wow, that was very powerful and wonderful. Did we want to take some, did you guys feel up for questions or anything? Anybody does anyone have questions?
I have a question for Zach. It's the first time I'm meeting you, but I just love you already. And I work with Anna, and she talks about you, and so yeah. So yeah. But anyways, my question is that, so coming to UCSC and like going to university and changing, like learning and all of that, how did that work with your family and the people you left behind? Was there a kind of alienation, estrangement? Have you had to navigate that as a kind of grief? Because I imagine now there's quite a sort of fissure between you and that community. But what about family? Has that been impacted?
Yeah, that's such an excellent question. So yes, as like the most simple term. I think what was interesting is that as I did my undergrad at Virginia Tech. It's like a smaller school, but I think a little bit more known. And I found like my first sense of like queer community really there. I had we had drama theater in high school, which I feel like everyone knows, like the Hit and Gay Club. But when I went to undergrad, it was like the first time I was like in community, and we would like be out and like be a little bit more like vibrant. And at that time, I started experimenting more with gender. I kind of perceived myself in a safer like space. So it started with me painting my nails. And I really wanted it. So I like went to class for the first time painting my nails. And I think I had this assumption that other queer people in my community would hold that and like be really proud of me, or at least give me encouragement, or at like the minimum not say something rude. And I actually found that they had some of the harsher feedback onto me. And so that was like, I think the first time in like that journey of like starting to come out and starting to experiment and like kind of thinking that I had a sense of community. And then it's still having this dissonance for me. So then like, the questions reemerge of like, oh, am I wrong for this? Should I not be doing this? And it wasn't until later on in my undergraduate experience that I realized like, oh, y'all are just unhealthy. I don't need to do this. And so I like pretty much like fully like cut off that community. Even before I left, I started learning more and more. Like I started learning more about like the systems of injustice. I started learning about how deeply embedded gender is into our world and how much of it is a socialized experience. And I started realizing, like, oh, all these feelings of like, I need to be masculine to be like perceived as attractive. I need to be masculine to be perceived as valid. I started realizing these are all like socialized constructs around me. Like I get to decide my own journey. So when I did that, I started like wearing dresses to class, and I would walk in, I could feel this level of confidence where I am strutting into this classroom. Like no one's telling me something against it. And it was from that I found people who gravitated towards me in that way. And so that started building a more of a sense of community. My family, my parents were always okay with me being gay. They like were a little bit more like on the hippie love is love kind of like train boat with that. But when it came to my gender and started being a little bit more femme, when I started wanting to use they them pronouns, my mom had a pretty strong reaction to me. She still doesn't use my pronouns to this day.
Thank you so
I'm going to continue with Zach. Was that a question? Anyway, I'm going to continue with Zach. It almost feels like a privilege to have grown up in California and had all my education here. I mean, privilege is one thing, but that's really important. But in continuing with where you came from, with 2 questions. Do you feel your community has changed at all? I mean, I don't know what year you graduated from high school, but has your community changed at all and gone a little bit different? And are there any books that are banned in your home state?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2016. My mom's still a teacher at the high school that I went to. And it has not only not changed, but it's actually regressed pretty strong amount. Our school board has implemented a lot of banned books. So I don't know if it's like Virginia, so it was Virginia. I don't think as a state they have banned books like that, but our school district specifically has a lot of banned books. And it's not just on like LGBTQ+, although that's certainly included. There's absolutely a lot that is talking about like communities of color, anything that has a culture that's outside of like Civil War, civil history kind of energy. And a lot of those books, like even on the online portals where they like have like the ebooks and stuff like that, all of those are limited as well. And so I know at our school site, we have 2 people who are on the school board that are like, I think incredibly stuck on wanting to be in the way that it's always traditionally been. And thus like any time progression happens, they like react even harder to it. So my mom is an English teacher and works with people who have learning needs. And talks about like the ways in which that restriction even is able to get access to like people who have like learning diverse experiences and like getting them the tools they need to be able to like make meaning of like simple tasks or being able to make like how to construct like their own living style. And so to answer your question, no, it's regressed unfortunately. I think that sub community, which again is not very many people, I think finds a lot of comfort in staying to things that way it's always been, and when someone tries to create change, they react with a lot more tension behind it. My mom's about to retire and is like counting down the days that she can move away.
Is that someone over here?
That's more of a comment, actually, for Zach. And it was just surprising when you said you were from Appalachia. And I've come across researchers who are actually doing research on the non-binary versus cisgender in the healthcare system in Appalachia. And the researchers who I've gotten to know if not queer themselves, are bisexual or, and so, but what I have found, having worked with them for about a year now, is because I think Appalachia just seems so traditional. It's up in the mountains. It's like from the Philippines, where all of these concepts are just so different. And how do you accept that? And how do you how do these concepts even enter into this culture? So when I found out about this research that we're doing in Appalachia, I invited them to this group researchers that I host once a month. When I thought about them, because not only the main researcher, who's now also doing research on non-binary in Mexico, is that they are a very supportive group among themselves. At least 10 of them come to support each other, and they're not related. And I think that speaks for itself among this community, regardless if you come from a family that is not going to accept you, that you are going into community that is just so embracing. Because that was what really struck me. And I wanted to hang around with them a lot because there was just all this love, that they were among themselves. So it's just a comment.
Thank you for sharing that experience, and I resonate with it. I think the people in my life that I consider my chosen family know me, and also we have a lot of the same interests and knowledge and co-creating information with each other. So I'm glad to hear that there's other communities that have been having that.
Okay, he's been waiting for a while, then you two, and then I can't say no to Cliff. And then that will be it.
First of all, thank you all four of you for being here tonight. My question is for Maddie and Alex. Maddie, you didn't mention, but I'm assuming you are a high school student.
Yes, in my senior year.
Yes, you are. Okay, so 2 seniors. So my question is, it's around what the conversation about banned books is like in your respective high schools. Is it confined only to your English classes, or the librarian, or is it infused throughout the campus?
Would you like to go first?
I am lucky enough to go to Delta High School. It's down here in Aptos. It's a small charter school. We got about 100 kids. It's my first year there. We talk a lot about banned books. Especially all the classes are very small. The way they do it there is definitely very different. I don't know if any of you know Jamie Cutter. She is my English teacher, and she is part of she runs the QSA. But we talk a lot about banned books, especially reading. I also part-time at Cabrillo. I'm reading Beloved right now, which is a very banned book. Yeah. I'm first 60 pages in. Wow. It's definitely an amazing book. And we talk about it a lot, how it's banned, why it's banned. We also talk about how other books are banned and what they are and why in more than one class. But I think I used to go to Scotts Valley High School. The one English teacher, a few English teachers, but besides that, nobody else. But also it's California, which is, thank God. But yeah, that's just my experience, but I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
My high school, sister school to Delta, Cypress High School, actually talks very little about the book bannings. You see, as an example of the school's culture, we lost the American flag somewhere in our shed, so we raise a rainbow flag every morning. And the law says you've got to raise an American flag, but we kind of just never really got to finding it. And then with the banned books, it's just been a silent and ongoing consensus that if any books were to somehow get banned here, we would just have them anyways. So it's never really been something, it's something that's discussed, of course, between individual people, but as a whole concern, we've kind of just accepted that if it becomes a problem, it certainly won't be a problem here. And I feel like the fact that that's enough for us is something I'm trying to fight, because we need to bring the fight out there instead of taking comfort in our shelter without giving back out. It's a great privilege, as that nice woman said, to live in such a nice state. But we've got to put out what we get.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
So how long have you been in California?
Well, I grew up here. I went to UCSC, and then we traveled around a little bit, but Florida for the last 10 years. And we just came back in beginning of June, so 3 months.
Okay. Okay, so might not be able to answer this, but I was curious about if you had come up against people challenging books in Santa Cruz County in the public library system.
I have not, but that is one of the questions that I asked in my interview because I was super curious about the difference between how things are done or what the deal is here versus what it's like in Florida. And the response that I got was that it's pretty rare. It happens every once in a while, something comes up, but very, very rarely.
Can I chime in?
Yes, please.
I can tell, I've been working in this library system for more than 25 years, and there's never been a significant challenge to any material that has gone beyond maybe 1 or 2 people getting to even the point where they fill out the form saying that they're concerned. No book has ever been removed. Usually any challenge has been resolved with the discussion between the librarian and the individual.
This kind of, I think, will piggyback on something you said, Maddie, but and feel free to chime in as well. Is I think we do say a lot that we live in a place that we're very privileged in, but also, in my experience as an educator and a non-binary educator working with youth in Santa Cruz and Monterey County, is California can be pretty unkind to gender non-conforming people, and so, like you were saying, we have to get out of our shelter. I feel like all of us in this room are coming from a certain perspective, but what do we do as people who are not necessarily always in youth spaces or youth queer spaces to not be lulled into that sense of security that this is Santa Cruz or Santa Cruz County or California and this can't happen here, because it is happening in South Santa Cruz County right now. And so what do we do to help you continue to have the space to think and learn and grow and explore?
That is an amazing question. And it's the perfect question to ask me because I actually have a TED Talk out on that exact topic. Wow. It's called How to Create a Safe Space on YouTube. So I put a lot of thought into that very question. And what I'd say the most valuable thing all of you can do any day is to ask yourself, am I someone who would be a safe person to be around for someone who's questioning their identity, either if they're considering being queer or if they're from a place of malice considering leaving that behind? You see, when I say that we get bloated on our comfort, what I mean is that often I see people who are in places where we're safe to be who we are, for instance, joking about being transphobic even when we are trans and things like that. And someone who's just entering this group sees that and suddenly feels like they're not safe even in an environment where they are. Or someone who wants this environment to be malicious suddenly feels a little bit more at home. It's important to ask yourself, am I a safe person? Because you can't make a safe space out of a country, out of a state, country, city, out of anything, unless it's filled with safe people, because those are what made it in the first place.
The last question goes to Cliff.
I have a question for Amber. I'm wondering, in Florida, have they actually prosecuted or come after any librarians at all? And if so, would it be the cops who did it? And is there support for librarians and or teachers, either, I don't know, is there support either in the community or
There is organizational support for sure. There's a really great school media or school library media group they're called FAME, which I love, and they're fantastic. I absolutely they are extremely supportive. ALA has also stepped in and helped some of our school librarians and public librarians as well that have come under attack. There is a lot of organizational support. There's also a lot of, people just not knowing if they get a challenge, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to advocate for themselves or advocate for each other. So there's still a lot of learning to be done in those communities as well. But the support is really good. And then as far as the felony question, when that was written into law, I remember the discussions on the floor of the Senate, because I watched all of those hearings about this state statute in particular. And there was a lot of conversation about, well, are we actually going to prosecute librarians? It just seems so out there, who would do that? And to my knowledge, no one has ever been, served a felony, and I don't know who would actually serve that felony or how they would go about that. But yeah, it's a threat. It's a threat. It's in state statute to scare librarians, school librarians, from having any material that's deemed pornographic in their schools.
Thank you. And I hope we can all just hang on for another moment. Maggie Pina from the Diversity Center has a message for us.
Yeah, I just want to thank all of you for being here. It's been an honor to serve on the United Against Hate Planning Committee and building out this programming. And I just want to put something into perspective for you. We're in a bubble here in Santa Cruz, but a couple weeks ago we received a threat of violence at the center. So we like to think that we are in a safe bubble, that Santa Cruz. But there's still so much work that needs to be done as allies. So just being here and educating yourself, taking these stories and thinking about how can I be a safe person? Because we definitely need more of those. So I'm just grateful for all of you for being here. There is some information up on the table here with some youth programming going on. But we have programs for adults. We've got queer and trans yoga, a book club, and rituals. So, I think community is the best medicine when we're trying to combat hate and we're trying to combat isolation. So I just, hope that you reach out. I hope that when you come across more trans and non-binary youth that you listen to them. Because that's the biggest honor I have is getting to work with youth in our community. Because what they're really breaking down is patriarchal values and this hold of what gender should be. And gender is what you make it, it's handmade. And once we figure that out as a community, I think we'll get to experience a lot more liberation. So I just want to thank Santa Cruz Libraries for partnering with us and our panelists. And there are some free books up here if you're wanting to check out some portrait books of trans community members. And yeah, just thanks for being here.